Okay, good afternoon, students.
Good afternoon, teacher.
Okay, thank you very much. Give you a hand for a greeting. Okay, how was the weekend?
It was good.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So now we can start the teaching learning process. We have already started chapter 3 about philosophy of language, logic and language. Under our first contact of this chapter, we try to see some concepts of logic, I mean philosophy of language. Under this, we have seen concepts, basic concepts of philosophy of language, and we have seen some philosophical approaches of meaning, and also we have seen the different functions of language, the connotative and the emotive functions of language. We have taken that. The cognitive function of language is only to convey or transfer our message to anyone else that we want to transfer. And we have said the emotive meanings of, or the emotive function of the language is to express our feelings, our emotions, our sentiments by using value claim words, which will help the arguer to impose or to provoke the listener. We have taken that the very function or purpose of the emotive function of language is to express our deep feeling emotions by adding the value claim words. Those value claim words will help the arguer to transmit, to express his feelings and to let the listener or the reader to accept him simply by looking at his value claim words without looking at the premises in detail. Simply they accept it because it has a value claim words. And also we have seen the intention and extensional definition. We have taken that in intentional, we define a term by its attributes. Whereas in the case of extension, we define that term or that word by listing those members or the objects. It might be illustrative, it might be also exhaustive. It may be a partial listing, it might be a complete listing. Today, our discussion is the continuation of this. We'll look at, let me show you. Okay, this is our today's discussion. But to give emphasis for our last discussion, we have stated that always the intentional meaning determines the extension. So that always there is intentional definition of terms or words, but there might not be extensional different definitions or meaning because of different reasons, as I have told you. That this reason, for example, might be due to the extinction or the disappearance of those objects on the ground or on the earth or on the planet. So that always the intention determines the extension. And also, there cannot be empty intention, we have said this one, but there might be empty extension. Today, we'll look at the meaning, the type, and the purpose of definition. As we have already discussed in the last session, the meaning that a word or a term have clarified by the definition. For example, the meanings of, we may define the meanings of a word or a term. The definition that we have done is expressed or clarified by the so-called definition. So there is meaning within the definition. So always the words or terms are going to be clarified through definition. So definition is a technical and structural organization of words, or it might be terms or phrases which will going to explain the meaning of that term. So we have taken that good definition are very pivotal and crucial to reduce or eliminate a kind of verbal dispute, because we have taken that when we use definition in a proper manner, or when we stipulate a good definition for terms, we can eliminate conflicts that arise from verbal disputes. So a good definition will help us in resolving or eliminating disputes like verbal disputes, because these disputes are not disputes of genuinity and facts on the ground, so they can be eliminated through a good definition. Simply this tells us providing a kind of good definition will help us in advance to eliminate such defects of language for understanding of it. Therefore, we may define a definition as a group of words that assign a meaning to some words or a groups of words. So accordingly, we may have two parties in a certain or in a single definition. Of course, we have seen these concepts in chapter 2, in recognizing the non-argumentative passages from argumentative. We have discussed about the defining and the definers. So we have two parties in a definition, in every definition. The first one is the definer, the second one is the definers. Let us say on these two parts of the definition. When we say a definer, it is a word or a group of words that we are going towards supposed to define it. On the other hand, define is the word or the groups of words that will tell the definition or the defining. To make it clear, these concepts, let's look at examples. For example, as you can see here, oh, my spotlight is not working, so follow me on the screen. It is stuck. So, for example, in the definition of tiger, look here, tiger means a large, striped and fierce fellow indigenous to the jungle of the Indian and Asia. From this definition, this is the definition of tiger. Starting from this up to this is the definition of tiger. From this example, you can understand in this definition there are two parts. The first part is the definer, and the second part is the definers. From this example, the term or it's the noun here, tiger, is the definer, which means this is a word that we're supposed to define it. On the other hand, the remaining explanation of or definition of tiger are known as the definers, because they are a group of words that does the defining. So the terms that are going to be defined with the definer, whereas the remaining elements of the definition are called definers. But what we can say here is that the definers of this definition cannot stand by itself, because it's a mere extension of the definer, that is the tiger. So because of this, define is not itself a meaning of a define, rather it's a group of words that symbolize or that's supposed to symbolize the same meaning as the define. No matter we are dividing the parts of the definition into two, nearly they are similar. We cannot understand that definition without the existence of these two parts simultaneously. So we cannot look at separately. The definers define the definer, so it cannot stand up. For example, if we reject the noun tiger and we look at the remaining, it will become meaningless. Okay, so they should be go hand in hand. So in this way, the definition assigned the meaning to it is a definer. So if we have this understanding of the definer and the definers, let us look at the types, the categories of definition and their purpose. What is their aim or their objective? The objective of each types of definition we'll look at in detail. In general, based on their function, the defining is the typology, the defining criteria is their function. So don't forget that. The typology depend on their function of the definition. So in general, we can define these types of definition based on their function into 5 categories. Sorry for the reflexive action, students. The first one is the stipulative definition. The second one is lexical definition. The third types of definition is the precising definition. And the fourth one is the theoretical definition. And the last one is the persuasive definition. So now let's look at each types of definition one by one. The first one is stipulative definition. As the name indicates, this types of definition is a kind of definition in which it tries to assign a meaning of a word or a term for the first time. Under this definition, the meanings that we have given for the term or for the subject of the definition is for the first time. So a stipulative definition is giving of or assigning of meaning for words for the first time. This means we may, in one hand, coin a new words. We may create a new words by our own way. At the same time, we may also give meaning to those words which are old but are not given definition. So it works for these two situations, pointing of the new word and giving meaning to the old words. When we see the purpose of this definition is that it is usually done to replace a more complex expression with simple one, simply to make it simple. To make expressions simple, or replacing a kind of complex expression of a term by simpler one. So the essence or the need for stipulated definition is occasioned by new phenomena or development. At the same time, it can be also the need for this kind of definition is to give a kind of definition to set up a secret codes. Let us look at this definition by looking at example. Okay, when we say it is needed for the development of new ideas, mean that, for example, you as an individual or anyone else may coin a new word that is a new definition for the first time. For example, let's look at, assume that before a year or before a decade, there was a kind of crossbreeding between the tiger and the lion, because these animals in the zoo has a kind of similar genetic. There's genetic similarity, so that they can crossbreed. They can crossbreed, so that if you suppose, or if you want to crossbreed by taking a male tiger and a female lion, then you may have a kind of offspring which combine the attributes of these two animals. Then after, you may coin or you may give a name for that offspring. As I have told you, if we crossbreed by bringing a male tiger and a female lion, the crossbreeding, you may give that name as tiger or like that, by taking only the first letters of these animals on the group. For example, you take the zoo. On the zoo, the first letter of the tiger, TI, TIG, and then taking the name of the lion. And it gives the combination of this, gives as a tiger. Means you coined a new word. When you define it, you might define it by referring the attributes of these two animals. Simply, you coined a new name for the first time by crossbreeding these genetically similar animals. So stipulative definition helps us for these cases because the name you give for this crossbreeding is for the first time. So such kinds of giving definition or meaning is known as stipulative definition. So the one case that we may give a kind of stipulative definition in the case of the development of new ideas and words. The second occasion, where the second occurrence in which we may coin a word through stipulative definition is that in the case of that we may, for example, use a kind of secret words in military operation. Let me give you again one example here. During the Second World War, there was a secret code known as Torah, Torah, Torah. It's a military secret code. This was a code given by an admiral in Japan to transmit a war report to the war office to say that the fleet of the Japan are not spotted while they're bombing at the Pearl Harbor. This is a code. It's only known by those members. It's a secret code. The other example is that in the case of the invasion of Iraq, there was a military secret code known as the Operation Desert Storm. This was to mean that the conquest of the Iraq or the invasion of the military invasion of Iraq. It was to mean like this. So a stipulative definition held for these two cases in order to coin a new word and to use a secret military course. Okay. Now let's jump to the second types of lexical definition. That is lexical definition. I think you have a prior understanding of what a lexical definition is. If not, don't worry. But I am sure that you know a lexic better. So a lexical definition is a type of definition in which it's used to report the meanings that a word already has in language. The meaning of a word in language is known as a lexical definition. It is a kind of definition that we use in academic teaching learning process. Because such types of definition will enhance to eliminate a kind of ambiguity between the sender and the receiver of the message. So lexical definition is nothing but it means it is a dictionary definition. All instances or examples of dictionary definition are examples of lexical definition. For example, you can take Merritt Dictionary. You may take Oxford, top and other instance of dictionary are examples of lexical definition. Therefore, one thing that we have seen in the case of stipulative definition is that we cannot say that a kind of definition that is in the case of stipulative definition is a true or false, because we have said that in the case of stipulative definition there is arbitrary assignments of definition of the word. Because of that arbitrariness, we cannot say that either true or false. But in the case of lexical definition, we can say a definition either true or false, depending on whether that definition does the definition rightly or not rightly or actually used in line with the definition of that term. So here in lexical, for example, you will have an exam for this course, and there will be a true false item question. At that time, you will respond those questions by saying true or false, depending on whether that question does depending on the case in point. If that does not work, you may respond like false. You may respond as false, because in every teaching learning process we use a kind of lexical terms. Without the use of lexical definition, totally it's impossible to have a kind of discussion with learners. So simply it is to say that we can respond definition is a true or false, because there is no arbitrary assignment of words, unlike the stipulative definition. So lexical definition has a kind of eliminating the ambiguity. The purpose of a lexical definition is that eliminating the ambiguity, because we can easily refer the definition of a term by referring dictionary. If it works like that, you'll check it on that line. If that is not, you'll shift. Simply, it will let you to eliminate your ambiguity. For example, when you enter into ambiguity, you'll browse your dictionary on your mobile phone and will become clear. Simply, you eliminate your ambiguity. So the lexical definition helps you to eliminate ambiguity on words, because those ambiguity arise because of, we have said, because of lack of what? Clarity. Because in the case of ambiguity, there are discrete definition. By looking at those discrete specific definition, you minimize your ambiguity, so that the purpose of lexical definition is eliminating ambiguity. Let's look at the third types of definition, that is precise definition. The name itself speaks what a precise definition is. Only looking at its name, precise, make it precise, which means reducing ambiguity. Unlike the above kinds of, that is the lexical definition, the purpose of the precise definition is reducing vagueness. Vague. We have taken that a term or a subject of a statement is said to vague when there is continuous range of interpretation of a term. Continuous. So that if we clearly define that term or that word, it will reduce that vagueness or minimize that continuous range of interpretation of the word. So that it helps us for reducing the vagueness of a term. So the function of the precise definition is to clarify vague words. So precise definition clarifies the vague words and vagueness because they are problems that affect intentional meanings. Because we have taken that those language defects are basically affected the intentional meanings. So the precising definition differ from the first types of definition, that is stipulative definition, is that the later, that is, which means the stipulation. In the case of stipulative definition, there is arbitrary assignment of meaning. We have taken this one. In the stipulative definition, we simply or we arbitrarily assign meaning. For example, when you find tiger, lie gone, that's an arbitrary assignment of the meaning. Whereas in the case of precise definition, the assignment of the meaning is in a precise definition. That is not based on an arbitrary, like the upper lexical definition. There is no arbitrary assignments of words, which means we can say it's true or false. When the vagueness of a word is reduced, because the very purpose of the definition is reducing the vagueness, the precise definition can reach a decision at the applicability of the word to the specific situation, which is refers in that context. This is the third types of definition. The third types of definition is a theoretical definition. The name itself also explanatory here. You see, theoretical definition. What comes to your mind when you are hearing theoretical definition? Kabada. What comes to your mind without looking at the screen? What comes to your mind when you are hearing?
Are you hearing me, Mr.?
Okay, I'm listening to you, Kabada. What comes to your mind?
It's theoretically only the theoretical issue. It's not applicable.
Okay.
It's scientific or the other theoretical issue.
Okay. Okay. Very fantastic idea. Lydia, what comes to your mind when you are hearing the word theoretical definition? We have seen the first three types of definition: the lexical definition, stipulative definition, and the precise definition. But what comes to your mind when you are hearing theoretical definition? Lydia, are you hearing me? It's just to make the teaching learning process participatory. Oh? No idea? Lydia, please. Okay, can you continue, please? Your voice is not audible, Lydia. Okay, I'll come back to you. Your voice is not audible. Let me give this chance for other students. Brooke.
Wait.
Have you an idea on these types of definition?
Yes, theoretical definition is experimental, or otherwise,
Experimental.
acceptance the theory
Okay.
governing the.
Okay. 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 Any more? If any, you can show your hands. Okay, Brooke.
Yes, sir.
Let me give you the chance, please.
There is another Brooke Adam.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. That's great.
So I think regarding this kind of definition, we can define words terms based on different findings, like from science, philosophy, history,
Okay.
research works.
Okay. Okay. Any more?
Yeah, based on the different, standing from different theories, we can define a given word.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your reaction.
Okay, you will.
Okay, now let's look at what theoretical definition is. It's self-explanatory. It's theory-based, defining terms or words by referring those theories. When you define a term, for example, you may define the word, as you hear, look at from the screen, you may define the word heat or motion. Okay? When we define motion or heat or speed, we must refer or incite the theory that applies in defining this term or this word. If we refer those theory and define words accordingly, we can take that as a kind of theoretical definition. For example, we may define motion according to Newton, first law of motion, or second or third law of motion, and other terms. But we cannot define all terms by referring theories, because there are many terms which are not covered by theories. So we cannot define all terms or words by using a kind of theoretical definition. I mean, there is limitation to use this kind of definition to all terms and words. So as you can see from the screen, a theoretical definition assigns a meaning to the word by suggesting a theory or referring a theory that gives a certain characteristic to the entities that the term denotes. So the definition of the term heat, for example, found in the text dealing with kinetic theory of heat, provide that a good example. According to this kinetic theory, heat means the energy associated with the random motion of the molecules of a substance. This is an example of theoretical definition. So as I have told you that we cannot define all words by referring theoretical definition, because there is limitation even in science. Science do not cover all terms. The new words may be supported by some theories at the present time, but the remaining other words may not. So, like stipulated definition, theoretical definition or neither true nor false, strictly speaking. Because the reason why we cannot say that the theoretical definition is either true or false is that theories can be deconstructed again. Because knowledge is not something that is static. Through time, through change of time, theories may be deconstructed. They may not be acceptable. So we may change definition of terms accordingly. Because a body of knowledge is not always static. Science updates itself throughout time. Through the passage of time, there is renewal of knowledge and deconstruction and the construction of new knowledge. So those new knowledge may not in line with or may not support the existing theory. Here it is to say the reason why it is not that this one. The reason is that theoretical definition functions as a proposal to see or interrupt some phenomenon in certain way. It is specific to situation. Okay? Okay. Now we can jump to the last but not the least types of definition for this discussion. That is persuasive. By the way, all the 5 types of definition, you can understand that types of definition by merely looking at the types of definition itself. Persuasive, it's a leading, it's explanatory itself. Persuasive, make it something plausible or acceptable, or making a kind of definition that will be accepted by others, or a kind of persuasion definition by instigating or by touching the attitudes of the others to think in line with that. So the very purpose of this definition is to provide a kind of persuasion or influencing the attitudes of others' perception. So as you can look here, the purpose of persuasive definition is to engender a favorable and unfavorable attitude as per our interest, as per the point that we wanted to touch, towards what is donated by the definer. This purpose is accomplished by assigning emotionally charged value-added meanings. As I have told you, in the case of here, it uses some emotive expressions, value-laden terms, value-laden. Always don't forget, when you add emotionally charged or value-laden meanings to the audience or to the reader, they will accept you, or you will influence the attitudes of them or their perception, even without providing sufficient and necessary claims. So it achieves its objective by using emotionally charged value-laden meaning to the word, because they will accept, the readers, the audience will accept that word in advance. So while persuasive definition may, like lexical definition, be evaluated either true or false, the primary issue is neither true nor falsity, because its purpose is to persuade or change the attitudes of the other in line with your interest. It might be unfavorable with that or unfavorable. unfavorably. So giving the primary objective of this is that influencing the attitudes of reader or listener. Persuasive may be used with considerable effectiveness in political speech and editorial columns. So in the case of persuasive definition, what politicians, typically those orators and charismatic leaders, use a kind of persuasive definitions to attract and influence the behavior of the audience in line with them, and to affect their behavior to accept what they have already said. So this kind of definition become very effective in the case of political speech and election campaign. These are the 5 types of definition and their function or their purpose. Now we can jump to the techniques. We have seen the 5 types of definition and their purpose. Now the techniques, the ways of definition. The way. Of course, we have seen those concepts, preliminary concepts, which help you to understand these techniques, because we have seen the intentional and extensional definition in some extent. Now let's look at them in detail. So in general, we may classify these techniques of definition into 2 kinds. The first one is intentional techniques of definition. And the second one is the extensional techniques of definition. Now let's look at separately. We have said that extensional definition, also known as a denotative definition. We have said this one in the last session. It can also be known as denotative. So an extensional definition is nothing but it means it is assigning of meaning to the word or a term by indicating the term's members, the members of the term within it, or the members of the class that contains the word that is going to be defined, that is the definer, which it denotes. So extension or denotative definitional techniques means defining a word or a term by indicating, by showing, or it might be by listing the members of the class, which it constitutes within the defined term. It denotes. Under this, we may define a word into 3 techniques or into 3 ways, which means extensional or denotative definitional techniques can be understood into 3 ways. The first one is pointing of them. Them here refers to the members of the class, pointing of the members of the class, pointing of them. Alternatively, it's known as a demonstrative or ostensive definition. The second ways of the techniques of extensional definition is that naming them individually, naming, enumerating the definitions or listing the definitions. The third one is naming them in group, individually and in group, individually and in group, and pointing them. Let us look at this in detail. When we say pointing them, when we say pointing of them, for example, if we went to define a car or an automobile or a chair or a pen, in the case of this ostensive definition or pointing of the member definition is that I must show the members of that define them to the audience. For example, if I have here, unfortunately, I don't have an object at my hand to show you an example. For example, I may say that chair. Chair is the collective name of, it may include the wooden chair. Chair means this one, and that one, and that one, and again this one. This pointing by touching it. By touching the object. So a kind of pointing or ostensive definition is that showing the objects, showing the types of chair. A chair made up of a wood, a chair made up of a metal, a chair made up of other material. Chair means this, and this. By pointing, not by listing, by showing. I bring those types of chair on this and I will show to the audience. Then I told them chair means this one, and this one. I point them, I touch them. Then I define it, what chair is means. On the other hand, there is a listing of or enumerated definition individually. For example, I may define some words. For example, I may define fiction. I may define a movie. I may define a poem writer. I may define other thing. When I define it, for example, when I define an actor, actor means like I may illustrate partially or completely. Actor means or artist means actor means an actor or an artist like I mean Mastan, Bahaidu, Mahadir, Balcha. I may list these artists. I list them. So actor means like this, pointing them. I mean not pointing, listing them, partially or completely. But in most cases, it is very tricky or very difficult to give a kind of a complete list of definition in the case of this enumerated definition, because I cannot list exhaustively all artists in Ethiopia. I may list some of them: Mahadir, Balcha, Shoavar Rao and Makaras like that. But it becomes very difficult to exhaustively list all actors. But it is the most important thing to understand the definition of that term. If we are able to list all members of that listing, it is better to list them all. But in the real world, it's very difficult to list all members of the definition in the case of enumerated definition. You can look at on the screen here. In the case of, as I have told you, ostensive definition, it's a meaning of pointing, and it can be either partial or complex. It's also a kind of primitive definition. It's very advantageous in the case of there is language disparity. It's also the most limited one. For example, if we want to define a moon or a sun, in the case of ostensive definition, it must, if we define a moon, it must be at night. It must be at night. If I want to define a sun, it must be at the daytime. So that was the reason why we call it is a primitive. It's a primitive. In the absence of those objects, it will become very difficult to define it because you cannot pointing. For example, in the absence of this chair, I cannot define it. It must exist first. A sun must exist, a moon must exist at that time. For example, if the moon is covered by the clouds at night, and if I want to define a moon at that time for somebody, I cannot do that because it must exist first. That is the reason why we call it a primitive. And also it's the most limited one. But the most important thing, or the advantage of these types of definition is that in the case where there is disparity or difference of language. For example, I may speak French, Kabada may speak Portuguese. At that time, we have different language. So that this ostensive definition helps us for better understanding despite our language disparity. Because I simply point the sky, or I simply point the chair, or any object or any item. Then by looking that item or object, we can easily understand by avoiding or by lefting into somewhere our language disparity. So in the case of language disparity, this kind of definition is very, very, very important. So you can use this definition in case when there is language difference. If your audience is not in a position to understand your language, please make a definition in the context of these types of definition, because it will help you your efforts. So this is a kind of primitive. As the contemporary time, this kind of definition is very rare, but it has a very, very crucial and pivotal advantage in some occasion and in some instances. As I told you, enumerating definition is naming the individual, meaning to a term by naming the members of the class the term it denotes. like demonstrative is a may also be either partial or complete. Any forms of definition can be partial or complete. Complete enumeration is the most important thing because it will satisfy the elements of the defined that it will going to it denotes. Because it gives you a great sorry. Now we can jump to the third types of definition. I mean, there is some Nisu. Is that only for Nisu or are you hearing me, guys? I am receiving a comment. My voice is not audible for a connection problem. Is that works for all of you? If there is problem, please give me.
I can hear.
Okay, okay, covered. Thank you. So this is not a problem from the source. It might be a device from you. Problem of device from you. So now let's look at the third types of, that is the sub category of that definition. That definition by subclass. This is also similar with that this thing. The difference is it's defining it by class. For example, look here. When you define tree, the term tree, we may define tree means as oak, pine, even spruce, maple, and the like. We don't exhaustively list all members. So that is a partial listing. So when we're defining a term in the case of defining by a subclass, it's naming those under this this category and under this class, we define the other subclass. Oak, pine, it's a kind of defining by subclass. For example, we may define fictional works. Fiction is very what? It's a class. It contains fiction works, contains a poem, a play, a novel, and a short story. So in defining fictitious works through definition by subclass is that naming those subclasses under fiction works, such as poem, a play, novel, and short stories. So this is definition of class, definition by subclass. So these are the three ways of indicating members of the class in the case of extensional or denotative definition. I think let me give you a tea break.
በትምህርት ከፍ ብሎ መብረር ይቻላል። ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ከከፍተኛ ትምህርት አግባብነትና ጥራት ኤጀንሲ ሙሉ ዕውቅናን ባገኘንባቸው በማስተርስ ዲግሪ ኤምቢኤ በስትራቴጂክ ማኔጅመንት፣ ኤምቢኤ በባንኪንግ እና ፋይናንስ፣ ኤምቢኤ በቢዝነስ ሊደርሺፕ፣ ኤምቢኤ በሪስክና ኢንሹራንስ፣ ኤምኤስሲ በኢንተርናሽናል ትሬድ እና ኢኮኖሚክስ ዘርፎች በእውቀት ለመቅረጽ የበቁ ፕሮፌሰሮቻችን አረንጓዴ መብራታቸውን አብርተዋል። በነገራችን ላይ በኬንያ ሀገር ከሚገኙ ስመጥር ዩኒቨርሲቲዎች በሚመጡ ፕሮፌሰሮች የትኩረት መስክ ትምህርቶቹ መሰጠታቸው ልዩ ያደርገናል። በምርጥ የትምህርት ስርዓት የተገነባው ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ በመጀመሪያ ዲግሪ በአቪዬሽን ማኔጅመንት፣ በሆቴል ማኔጅመንት፣ በአካውንቲንግ እና ፋይናንስ፣ በማርኬቲንግ ማኔጅመንት አስተማማኝ ትምህርት ይገቢውና ራስዎንና ሀገሮን ይለውጡ። አድራሻ 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።
Now we can start. Now let's look at the techniques of the intentional or the connotative definition. We have seen the extensional or the denotative definitional techniques. The three definitions through subclass by naming individually itself, and also we have seen the ostensive definition. And I think you are clear with this concepts. So now let's see the intentional or the quantitative definitional techniques. You have, I think, an understanding of the intentional or the quantitative definitional technique, which means it is assigning or defining of the meaning or giving meaning or assigning meaning to a term or a word by indicating the qualities, the attributes, the attribute or the features of that we going to define, that is define them. So it's all about indicating or assigning meaning to the term by indicating the qualities. So there are at least 4 strategies. We have seen the 3 strategies of the denotative or the extensional definition, but in the case of intentional or the quantitative definitional techniques, we have 4 strategies, or we have these subtypes of the intentional definitional technique. The first one is synonymous definition. That's very explanatory. Only understand the first term, that's synonym. Synonymous definition, etymological definition, operational definition, and definition by genus and difference. We have seen definition by subclass in the case of extensional subclass. In the case of intentional, definition by genus and differences. Let us look at the first types of definition, that's synonym definition. The word itself explains. Synonym definition means is defining of a term by indicating or by assigning the other similar attributes, or which means is defining, as it defines in a single word that connotes the same attribute as defined, that the define is a synonym the word being defined. So the word that is synonym with the term or the word that we define it has also a kind of similar attribute with that word that's going to be defined. So those 2 words can be used interchangeably, so that there will not be a problem of using either of that word. We can use interchangeably because the attributes within these 2 terms are quite similar, so that we can use interchangeably. For example, when we say technique, you see the word here, technique, is also means method. So we can use interchangeably technique and methods as a synonym, because the attributes of this defined, that is definies, are quite similar. If they are similar, we can use this defined as if they are similar, if they have a similar defines or attributes. So the attributes of the method and the techniques are similar, so we can use them interchangeably, so that we can take this definition as synonym definition. For example, if you go to your on your screen, for example, look here. If I select the word technique and you see synonym here, it says synonym. So it may be method, you see, system, practice. We can use these words because they are synonyms. If they are synonym, means that they have the same attributes, which means the definees has similar attributes, so that we can use them interchangeably. This is what we mean a synonym definition. So many words have a subtle shade of meaning that are not connected by any or other single words, which means this kinds of definition or synonym definition may not work for all terms and words, because there are words or there are terms which do not have a synonym if we wanted to replace that word. For example, when we see here the word wisdom, it is very, very difficult to find a word that is similar with wisdom. So wisdom is a very, very detailed. It has many attributes, detailed attributes, so that it is difficult to find the words that substitutes or we can use as a synonym with wisdom. We cannot, for example, the words knowledge, understanding, or sense. They cannot replace they are not the synonyms of wisdom. So here it is to say that all words and terms may not have a synonym definition. There are words which have a synonym definition, but there are also, on the other hand, words which cannot be defined through synonym definition because of the nature of their words themselves. The example is wisdom. You cannot find a word that will substitute the word wisdom. Etymological definition. The second, I think I give you a brief in advance even in the chapter 1, while defining epistemology, while defining metaphysics in ethics, aesthetics, and zoology. We try to look at in some extent etymological definition, defining of a word by referring the origin of the word, the historical background of that word, when that word used for the first time by referring to that one, etymologically. So etymological definition is nothing but it is defining of a term by looking at the origin, the history, and the development of that word from the very beginning. So etymological definition is assigning of meaning to a word or a meaning by disclosing the word's ancestor in both its own language or in other language. For example, we define epistemology, we define metaphysics, we define other terms which are originated from Greek and Latin. When we define it, this is a Latin word, which means we define like this. If we define words like that, we are defining that in a way of etymological definition, because we are referring these words by letting the origins or the word's ancestor. So etymological definition have a special importance for at least 2 reasons. The first importance of etymological definition is that the words convey the word's root meaning or seminal meaning of which all other associated meanings are derived. For example, if we understand the word poly or tri or hexa, the meaning of this, for example, poly means many. If we understand this word, if we understand the root meaning of this term, we can associate these terms while we are using in conjugation with other terms. For example, when we say polygamy, polygon, and other. So if we understand the root meaning of that word, it will be help to understand the associative meaning that are derived from this one. The second advantage is that if one is familiar with etymological of one word, one has the access to the meaning of entire constellation of related words. I have said this one. They are interrelated, by the way. These two advantages are interrelated. So etymological definition in general helps or has a function of understanding of the associative meanings of other related terms which are derived from the origin of that term. The third one is operational. You see, operational definition. It's assigning of meaning. Is assigning of meaning to a word by specifying certain experimental procedures. Previously, when I asked, I have provided a question for you, the theoretical definition. The types of, when we did the types of definition and their function, some of you define theoretical definition in this way, the case of operational definition. But here there is a difference between theoretical definition and operational definition. In the case of operational definition, it is to mean that giving meaning by showing experimental procedures that determine whether or not the word applied to a certain thing. For example, in order to say that a solution is an acid, it's only if and only if the paper, that's the litmus paper, turns from red color, if it's changing to, turns to red, when we insert into the solution. If it is not changed into red, we cannot define that solution as an acid, because the experimental procedure should determine the acidity or the baseness or the neutrality of the solution. If that works, if the experiment that has been demonstrated testifies that the solution changed into a red litmus paper, that certainly is that the solution is an acid. So specifying certain experimental procedure and defining meaning in this way is, we call it operational definition. Operational definition were invented for the purpose of typing down relatively abstract concepts to solid grounds of the empirical reality. The fourth one is definition by genus and difference. This is the last types of intentional meaning by a genus and difference, and assigning to a term by identifying the genus, the source of the genus of the term, and one or more words that, when they combine, convey the meaning to the term being defined. I think, you know, in biology, kingdom, species, and such like. I have forgotten the procedure, but there is a classification of, in biology, there is classification of kingdom, species, genus, like that. We can apply such definition in this instance. Is more generally applicable and achieve more adequate results than any other kinds of intentional definition. In logic, here, please understand the concept here, genus, in the specific way, that's in logic, simply means a relatively larger class. So when you compare genus and species, genus is a larger class, whereas species is relatively a small subclass of genus. It belongs within the genus. So here, you see, the species is ice, is the smaller subclass of water. Here is a water. The smaller is water, relatively larger class than ice, water, because it includes not only ices. Here the difference is frozen. What makes the water icy? That the water become frozen. So the difference is the frozen. So defining water through its species can be shown in this way. Okay, now let's see our last topic, that is lexical definition. The reason why we need to look at or discuss the one type of definition, that's lexical definition, is that we use this definition in academy, as I have told you. So understanding of this lexical definition is very important for our teaching learning process. So that it is better to look in detail about the lexical definition. So now let's look at the common rules or principles that lexical definition uses. In the case of, there are some rules are applied even for other types of definition, but we'll see in line with only the lexical definition. For the first common rule that is applied is that lexical definition should conform to a standard proper grammar. So in the case of lexical definition, there must be a proper grammar. If it do not use the proper grammar, it will not transfer the intended message or the message that we want to transfer. So a lexical definition should use the appropriate grammar. It must use the appropriate types of punctuation. It must use the appropriate other criteria of grammar. Let us look examples from your module. For example, if we define a bird as a warm-blooded feathered animal that can fly, the definition is too narrow, because in this definition it excludes or rejects ostrich, because ostrich cannot fly. So in defining the fur, we should not only say that animals that can fly. There are birds which cannot fly. That's ostrich. So in defining lexical definitions, we should not be neither too broad nor too narrow. Use on the middle ground. Okay, the fourth criteria is that, or the fourth rule that we use is that we should avoid lexical definition in the case of this. For example, if we want to define silent or signs or other words or other terms, we should not define in circular way. Circular definition means defining a term or a word around it, repeating that word again and again. For example, if I say the meaning or the definition of silence is the state of being, silence is a kind of self-clarity. Or if I say that a scientist is a person who studies about science, it's a circularity definition. It will not transfer the intended purpose, and it leads to ambiguity, because we have said that lexical definition should avoid ambiguity. So that if we use a circular definition rather than reducing or mitigating the ambiguity, it boosts or it escalates the ambiguity of the listener. So we should avoid defining terms in a circular way. The other rule is that it should not be negative when it can be affirmative. Of course, there are words which are necessarily negative, and also there are also words which are necessarily positive or affirmative. In case when the word is negative, we are only to define accordingly, negatively. For example, when we hear the word darkness or dark, by its very nature, dark is negative word. So we should define it negatively. For example, we may define dark as the absence of light. If the absence, the phrase the absence of is negative, tell us a negative notion. So we may define it negatively. But so if the word is by itself can be defined affirmatively or positively, we should define accordingly. For example, if we define the word, if you want to define the word chord is a harmony, we should not define the absence of discord. Okay? If it can be defined in a positive way, define it as a same, like if it is negative, we may define. But don't forget in defining a positive terms positively. So we should avoid defining positive definition in the case the terms can be defined positively. The sixth rule is that we should avoid figurative, obscure, vague, and ambiguous expression or languages. Figurative of the name indicators is figuring out, depicting picture. For example, instead of saying that I may say coming the is coming the desert, the ship of the desert. I create picture, image on the listener. So in lexical definition, we should not use like this obscure, vague, and ambiguous language. We have discussed these issues. So we should avoid vague and ambiguous language in the lexical definition. And the seventh one is to avoid affective terminologies. Affective terminology is emotive meanings, giving emotive meanings. Use a kind of fictitious and sarcastic expressions that will instigate the minds of the listener. Of course, this applied in most cases in the case of the political arena, so it's not good to go further. But as a rule, lexical definition should not be used an affective terminology. Example, you may define communism, liberalism in an affective way by arousing feeling of the listener. And the last rule is that lexical definition should not indicate the context to which it defines the pertains. Which means in defining terms, we should look at the contexts in which the definition is made. For example, I may want to define the word strike. Okay, the word strike. But I must define the term strike in context, in line with the situation. A strike in the case of football, a strike in the case of baseball, strike in the context of animal hunting, strike in the case of fishing. There is strike in fishing, in baseball, in football, and in animal hunting. So we should show that the context in which the define is pertains. Okay, this is all about our today's session. Before we have went up our class, let me give you some cautions, message from the instructor. I think you have done your assignment. I think before the online teaching learning process has been started, assignments has been sent to you. So that make sure that you are working your assignments in the upcoming class. You'll submit those assignments, and I will give you again another assignment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so now we can out. The meeting is over. Thank you very much.
ልዩነት መፍጠር ዓላማችን ነው። ዓለም አቀፍ ተወዳዳሪ መሆን አለባችሁ። የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ጥራትና ደረጃውን የጠበቀ ስልጠና በመስጠት ብቁ ዜጋ እያፈራን ነው። በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን፣ በበረራ መስተንግዶ፣ በቲኬቲንግና ሪዘርቬሽን፣ በሆቴልና ቱሪዝም ሙያዎች አሰልጥነን ተወዳዳሪ እናደርጉታለን። ኮሌጃችን ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና ከእንግሊዙ ICM ጋር በመተባበር ዓለም አቀፍ ዕውቅና ያለው ስልጠና እየሰጠ ይገኛል። በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን፣ በበረራ መስተንግዶ የምንሰጣቸው ስልጠና ከኢትዮጵያ ሲቪል አቪዬሽን ባለስልጣን ሙሉ ዕውቅና አለው። አድራሻ ከጎላጉል ታወር 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።